Welcome to The Writing Monkey, a podcast for writers about everything but writing. Subject matter experts and unique individuals are interviewed for writers by a writer.
This is Tiffany Biagas Munn of Owl Editing. She has been invaluable in helping me develop as a writer. And I've been writing a long time and got published a lot before I met Tiffany, but she's so good at what she does that I just have to sing her praises. And this is a special thank you to her. She helped me through a hard time, in my own life. And go ahead, Tiffany.
Hey, everybody. Luke, thank you so much for having me on The Writing Monkey. I'm an independent editor. My website is owlediting.com. And I love working with writers, especially writers who are newer at the craft, because it's just really fun to get to work with someone and give them feedback and see them grow as they come back to me with future projects. And I'm happy to be here and hoping I can answer some questions and give some good input on writing.
Okay, we're going to talk about writer's block with Tiffany. We're going to talk about some common mistakes that early beginning writers make. And she has a piece that she's written about self-doubt, the scariest thing of all, self-doubt, and is on her website. And I'll have a link to that on mine when the show is posted. And it's extremely important because I think that's really the root of writer's block is fear. Is you're afraid you don't know what to do or you don't know the answer, and there is no answer. You just write. And the best advice I ever got was from my wife, who told me, if you want to write, just write. Just start writing. There's no way to get better at it or learn anything until you just start writing. Tiffany has a bunch of good points here, but a few that really stand out to me is surround yourself with positive people and stop worrying about what others think. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on this since you actually wrote it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so surrounding yourself with positive people is so important. I have a critique group, and they help me out a lot with my writing. Not only are they providing constructive criticism, but they're also my cheerleaders. So, they're the people who see my story first, and they tell me everything that they like about it, and, they're like, oh, I'm so excited to see this in print one day. And having people like that surrounding you are obviously going to be pushing you up and helping you believe in yourself. And if you believe in yourself, you're so much more likely to reach your goals. And the second point you mentioned was, what was it?
You said stop worrying about what other people think.
Stop worrying. Okay, exactly. Yeah. Thank you for reminding me. Stop worrying what other people think. That is such a hard thing to do. Almost every person I know worries about what people think. But what the twist on that is everyone is worrying so much about what people think that they're honestly not thinking about you as much as you think. They're thinking about themselves.
Right.
Really, what's the point in worrying about what they're thinking? It's human nature, unfortunately, to be, a little selfish and think more about yourself. So do your own thing and be positive with yourself. Surround yourself with positive people, because in the end, when you look back at your life, you're not going to think, oh, darn, I wish this person or that person had liked me better. You're going to be thinking about whether you did what you had always hoped you want, what you'd always dreamed of doing.
Yeah.
And so you don't want to let those small things like what other people are saying or thinking get in your way of your dreams. You have to focus on yourself and believe in yourself. And a big part of that is, having those people that can pull you up when you need it, and then using positive talk with yourself. And that can be a really hard habit to make, but just like you train your body, you can also train your mind. So you just have to start doing it. And over time, you'll find yourself learning how to be more positive and trusting in yourself and not thinking so much about what other people are thinking.
Yeah, I know in my experience, I would worry about what other people thought. Then I quickly realized, wait a minute, at least I'm trying. At least I'm sitting here doing this. Whether it's the worst thing ever written, at least I'm doing it. And I realized most people are just projecting their own fear.
Mm-hmm.
And no matter how bad what you write is, it's always going to get better. No matter. And like you told me once, and this really resonated with me, is you can't improve something that doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you got that from somewhere else. I don't know, but it's great. And it helps me a lot.
Probably so.
That's one thing I was going to point out too. When you read my work, you don't tear me down. And a lot of people, I think, growing up, the experience we have showing our writing to other people is either it's criticized or it's graded harshly by a teacher who just is looking for errors, and you see those red marks on the paper. When you get a good beta reader, that's not what you get. You get you sprinkle a lot of compliments or positive compliments throughout, which really helps me because it's good to know what you're doing right, not just what you're doing wrong. And you also give me constructive criticism, and I always come away from my document feeling like I may have more work to do, but at least I know it's going to be really good. And I'm so glad I didn't rush out and publish something before somebody looked at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So a lot of us are afraid to feel terrible about ourselves and get negative feedback, but a good beta reader like you doesn't do that. You should come away feeling good about what you've done right and excited about fixing what you've done subpar or not good enough. And it's that's
a really good way to look at it.
It's a very different experience than just having a teacher or a parent look at your paper and tear it apart.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
I know that you're not just an editor, but you're also a writer, and you've actually written Sticks and Stones and Curses. It's a young adult novel.
Yeah.
And I would like you to talk about that if you would.
Okay, yeah. Well, Sticks and Stones and Curses is a story about a guy named Kennedy. He's a good guy he just makes a mistake. And a girl, Adina, she's has magic and also a temper. So he ends up cursed by Adina to spend every day in a new body, but it's always a person who's having really bad luck. So it's a very humorous story, but it's also a reminder to always look to the heart of a person. It's got magic, some mystery, of course, a love story, and lots of laughs.
That's great.
I'm currently querying it right now, and I actually got some exciting news a couple of days ago. I just received a partial request from an agent. So,
that's incredible.
She's going to be looking at that, and fingers crossed she'll like it, and hopefully I'll get to move forward in the publication process.
Well, if anyone deserves it, it's you. And that's really exciting. I'm so glad.
Oh, thanks.
I'm glad to hear that.
Thank you.
And I could see the potential in that story for teaching moments, being in other people's shoes.
Exactly, yeah. It's definitely got some of that.
That's really cool. I'm jumping around a little bit here, but I guess I wanted to remove those barriers so people could just start writing, because that's really where the magic happens. When you just start writing, you can't wait for anything to be ready. If you don't have the latest word processor, you don't need it. You can go online and use Google Documents or an online program. There's just too many options now. And you can just make up a story. It doesn't matter if it's very cliched. You can go back and fix those cliches. And all it takes sometimes is a quick change. The classic example I use a lot is if you want to write a zombie apocalypse story, write it. Then go back and look at it and you might realize the main character is a retired special forces guy with every weapon in the world. That's pretty common. So maybe you change it to a guy in a wheelchair. Suddenly all the challenges are there. The whole mindset's different. Maybe you've been in a wheelchair. Maybe you go talk to someone. Maybe you're in a wheelchair and try to spend a day or two in it. And that will just absolutely change your writing. It'll change your outlook of life. It'll make the book interesting and different. And I'm really big on talking to different people. I was raised that way. So it's a little uncomfortable, but I've never walked away from talking to somebody about their differences who wasn't appreciative of it after the fact. That all I want to do is understand you, represent you, and give you a chance to correct any falsities the media, and there's so many of them, that's why my guests just are everybody and anybody, from weapons experts to overweight people. I just want to hear from everybody, and I want everyone else to learn and apply to their, not just their life, but really this is focused on writing, just so to improve the quality of fiction out there. I've learned a lot of things already. It is possible to fire a gun underwater and have it work. It's also possible, to have a speck of dirt that makes the shell blow up and take your hand off. So,
cool.
What are some of the common mistakes you see with your writers who are probably mostly new, right? Unpublished writers?
Yeah. Okay, so some common writer mistakes: letting things happen to the main character rather than the main character making them happen. So you don't want it to be like this mysterious person shows up and tells your character that they're part of this prophecy, and then your character is like, okay, well, I don't know what to do about that. But then they get kidnapped, so they're forced to be in that world. And then they meet like a king who comes and says, well, I'm going to travel with you and do this. And the king handles all the problems, and then they meet somebody else, and then that brings them here. Like, all of those things are making your...
Yeah, they're victim of circumstance.
Victim of circumstance, exactly. Yeah, you don't want your main character to be so passive. So you want your main character, because of course that's who the reader is going to be, cheering for. That's the person you want them to be excited about. They have to be making things happen. And along that same line, don't let coincidence get your character out of trouble. Like, have your character figure out the way to save the day. Don't just let it be like, oh, thank God all these people with swords showed up to save us. Sometimes that can happen if you can work it out for your plot, but most times you want your main character to figure out what to do. Yeah,
you don't want to do that. And it makes your character look weak, and it's hard to identify with a character and really want to keep reading if you don't feel like, if you can't identify with a character, you don't necessarily want to keep reading the book.
Also, too much talking and not enough action in a scene. If you try to think about your book scenes like a movie scene, if we were just watching like an actor on the screen sit at his kitchen table and think about stuff, that'd be a pretty boring movie. That doesn't usually happen. So like you'll have just a little bit of like talking or thinking and then action. So you want to sort of replicate that same sort of thing in books. If your character is talking or thinking, make sure you break it up with action beats and having other stuff happen, setting, description. But everything is a balancing act. And sometimes as a new writer, it can be really hard to like go too far one way or the other.
I do a lot of telling, not showing, which is still a kind of a hard concept for me to grasp. And that's why when I write hot, I do a lot of telling, and then I have to go back and decide what to show. And if you don't understand what that means, the audience, not you, you can say so-and-so walked into the door, or you can describe it and show it in words, paint the scene, show it to people, show it to the reader. And I'll let Tiffany talk about that, because I know you had a good example before when we talked earlier on the phone.
Yeah, so telling versus showing. Like you said, it's totally okay to do telling in your early drafts because you just want to get the story down. And sometimes you have to tell yourself the story first. Then when you go back to, start revising, you can make it, shiny and pretty for your readers. So telling would be like, I think the example I used was like if somebody's dog died and they were really sad. Telling would be, she went home and found that her dog had died, and she was so sad for the next week. So you just tell the reader what happened. Well, if you want to show it, you would go home. She would go home and she'd find her dog dead, and you'd show some of the physical reactions, like tightening of the throat, sobs building up in your chest, your eyes getting red, and feeling sick to your stomach. So physical things. You can also share like the thoughts that be going through your head, like she maybe remembered when she first got the dog and he's a little puppy and so fluffy and soft. So those sort of things show us that she's really sad, and that brings readers more into the moment. And it's a lot stronger than just telling us.
Yeah, in my mind, when you start just that one example, my mind kind of goes in 10 different directions. I think of, wow, what an opportunity. You could show people her reaction, and maybe she doesn't react, and you may think, what's wrong with her? Is she a sociopath? Maybe the story's about someone who's impersonating someone else, and it's like she's not reacting to her own dog dying, so maybe that's a red flag. Or my mind just goes in a million places. I think, wow, what an opportunity to demonstrate something about this character, whether she's not what she says she is or overly emotional.
Absolutely. That's so cool. Like, that's a really good point. When you show readers stuff like that, it does reveal so much about character, and it can also add mystery and intrigue and tension, which, of course, those are all great tools to keep readers reading. So
do you have any other mistakes that you notice that are repeated? I know a lot of people have trouble with grammar and spelling. I actually am terrible at it, but I'd never really worry about it because those are the easy things to fix. The hard things to me are choosing the right word or getting the story written, not where to put a comma, even though that is important. I'm just so bad at it. I've tried to learn it and it doesn't stick in my head. So.
Yeah, grammar is very hard. I mean, it definitely is true that you don't have to stress about it to get your idea down, especially, like I said, sometimes you got to tell the story to yourself first. And so you don't want to be like slowing yourself down to check every comma and all your spelling. But then when you do want to start sharing it with beta readers or editors, it's good to clean it up at least a little bit, because sometimes if you have too many grammatical errors, your story starts to get lost within all of that. And so that is like so important, especially if you self-publish. You need to make sure that you have your like grammar and all that down, or that you do take the time to like find a copy editor or a line editor and get that stuff taken care of, because you want to put your best foot forward and give your story its best chance.
That's right.
The errors that I see the most, like grammatically, have to do with commas and like periods and semicolons, when you can combine sentences with those things and when you can't. I see a lot of run-on sentences would probably be like the most, like run-on sentences and sentence fragments tend to be the mistake I see the most. Yeah. So just like a real basic thing is you want to try to be simple most of the time with your writing. Sometimes, like in certain moments, you might want to like have like this really long sentence with like different clauses and just like really elegant. But most of the time, you want to get your idea across to the readers like as simply as possible so they can follow along. And so, you know, you want to have one sentence and a period. And if you're combining two full sentences together, then you need to have a conjunction like and or but, so, something like that, and you have to use a comma. You can't just like put two sentences together. I went to the store, comma, I bought bread. That doesn't work. It has to be I went to the store, comma, and I bought bread. Okay.
All right, so moving on. I'm sorry. I was actually going to move on and ask you, that is important, and just listening to you talk about it, it's like listening to someone talk about math. It can't be done, I think, over the audio medium.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
I was going to talk about sentence variation, and I read somewhere, I can't remember where it was, it might have been Grammar Girl, where she gave an example, like there was a paragraph where there were 5 sentences and each one had 10 words. And then there was one with, sentence variation, short sentences, long sentences. And it's amazing how different, what a big, huge difference sentence variation, the length of a sentence makes. The pacing, when you're reading something and it's got a nice mixture of long and short sentences. Do you have any comments on that? Because that's something I think some people have trouble with.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Well, overall, we humans like variety and also, balance. So it's a good idea just sort of to try to vary your sentence structure and length here and there. If you are writing like all short sentences, then it's going to start making it feel faster and choppier, which is good if you are in like a moment where there's a lot of action and you want to show like the intensity, like there are 2 men, fighting and there's a knife on the table and they're both trying to get it. Then you would want to like have some of those like quicker, faster beats, like he saw the knife, he looked over, he saw the knife too, they both grabbed for it, so like it starts to build up that momentum. Yeah. And times when characters are like feeling like some deep emotion or like coming to this like really big realization, sometimes the longer sentences can help because it gives it like echoes that same sort of feeling that we have ourselves when we're like thinking and coming to this conclusion. And then it can be so powerful like to mix those up. So say, for example, if we have a detective and they're thinking about, they're starting to put together like the final pieces in this mystery and they think they're about to figure out who the killer is. If you're like starting with like longer sentences, showing how he's kind of thinking and letting the reader like meander through the detective's thoughts with him. And then as he gets closer to the realization, you start to like do like shorter sentences like, wait, but so-and-so had lied, da-da-da. And then like you end with like a real short one, like so-and-so was the killer. So you can have really great like punch and the punch and rhythm by just like varying the sentences. And that is a really hard thing to like give exact rules on, but you can try different things and then read it out loud. When you read out loud, like hearing it will help you find what sounds the best.
Yeah, I found having someone read it out loud for me, if I can't do it myself, really, really helps. And if you can afford the time, letting it sit for as long as you can, weeks, months, it's always it's really good to come back with a fresh mind to something you've written. And I find,
definitely,
I feel like I'm designing an amusement park ride, like the haunted house, where sometimes they speed you really fast through the darkness and sometimes they slow you way down so you can soak in the scene that you're going past, and then they twist you around. Yeah. And to me, that's what writing is like. I feel like I'm trying to create a reader's experience, and sometimes you speed them forward, sometimes you slow them down.
That's a good example.
Yeah, well, thank you. I don't mind circling back and talking about writer's block some more, because that really is the theme of this show. And it's kind of the reason for the whole podcast, which is to help people get past these non-existent barriers to writing. They're all mental. It's worrying about, what if I'm not successful? What if somebody already wrote this idea? And all those things I remember I've dealt with. And once you start writing, you almost forget about all those problems. They just go away, because you realize as you write something, it becomes so uniquely yours. And every little decision you make, every word choice, every change you make, it makes it your own story, so much so that you stop worrying so much about somebody else having done that story.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Yeah, there's always a way to like put your own spin on something.
Yeah. Did we talk about character names? Because I know one thing that slows people down, or seems to, is character names. And I never let that slow me down, because it's either a specific reason there's needs to be a name. In some fiction, people want to have a certain name. But for the most part, a name is a name to me, and I just pick a name and go forward with it. And the example I like to use when people ask me about how do you name a character, it's like, well, what about the name Michael? It's really common. But if you think of Michael Corleone, the Godfather, you think of Michael Scott from The Office, or you think of Michael Myers from Halloween, they're all named Michael, but they each own that name and do something totally different with it, right? I mean, it doesn't matter what their name is.
Yeah, very true. Like you said, I mean, if there's a reason why they have a certain name, then like you're probably already gonna have that name in mind.
Right.
But one thing I do is, if I'm like stuck on a name just for like random minor characters, I don't know why, but I guess it's just a writer thing. Like you said, sometimes I'm like, what can name this random person? I'll just like text someone in my writers group and say, can you just like give me a few guy names or girl names depending on what I need? Or I'll just look online real quick and say like popular names for the 80s or 90s or currently, like whatever time period I need. And then just the first name that I see, or like the third name I'll pick. Because I think it's hard when sometimes creating like from nothing can be really hard for your brain. And when you're focused so much on your main character and your plot and all this stuff, and you're like, oh, well, now I need a name for this other character who is not really as fleshed out. It can be hard for you to just like pull a name from nowhere. But if you just look at a list and just pick a name, you're so right that it doesn't really matter. The name can function for the character, and if that character grows to be more important, that name can fit them as you show their personality, or if for some reason you think the name just doesn't fit them at all, you can always change it.
Yeah, I've discovered characters tend to own the name they have. You can name somebody. I had a guy, I just named him Francis, and Francis can be a really weak name, or can be, like Francis Ford Coppola, or this guy, his name was Francis, but he was a big, tough, kind of a redneck in one of the stories I wrote. And you never think twice about his name being Francis. And, the classic example, Leslie Nielsen. Leslie can be a girl's name. It's also a guy's name. So that's just another one of those minutia things I try to encourage people, just especially nowadays with the find and replace. You can change it later, but just move forward, keep going, keep writing.
Yeah, the find and replace thing is so helpful. And I'm glad you brought that up, because you can use that for everything, like with names, with descriptions. Like if you have something that you're like, okay, I want this setting to be so beautiful, and when readers read it, I want them to feel a sense of like awe, but you can't think of what to say. just like make yourself a note. You can either add a comment with the add comment feature in Word, or you can put in quotations like a note to yourself, highlight it, whatever, and just say like the house was, and then your little note can say like come back and add something that's really awe-inspiring or whatever, and then use the find and replace later. And you don't want to use find and replace like that, but like use the search function to come back, and when you have more time to think about it, or if you go online and search for images and then just describe them, or like you said, having the experience yourself, go out and find a place that makes you feel in awe and then describe it. Then you can come back and put that in your story. The important thing is not to get stuck on it when you're writing.
That's right. Yeah, momentum is very important to me. It's like riding a bike. I can't slow down in my first draft, or I lose it. I fall down, so to speak. And I used the hashtags. I remember talking to you about that. I would just put a hashtag, 3 of them in a row, and then write a note to myself and keep going. And then later I could go back and search for those hashtags, and I could prioritize them. I could deal with ones that are important or critical to the plot, or just address them until none of them exist, and then I know my first draft is ready to be cleaned up or looked at. I know one thing I do, and I think you had some thoughts on this. When I feel like I am blocked, I never just sit and stare. I feel like either there's something I can do mechanically. I can go and check the timeline of my story. I can do any number of things. I can read an article on something. I can address one of my hashtag notes, or sometimes I'll just stop. One of my favorite things to do is to write a character into a corner, so to speak, and then leave them and either go off for a little while and wait for that idea. It's almost like the characters are solving their own problems. And once I had written my character into a valley, he was surrounded by zombies, and I couldn't figure out how to get him out of it. So instead of rewriting it or staring at the screen, I just went to lunch, forgot about it. And on the way home, I stopped and stood on the side of the road. And as I was staring around thinking, how would I get out of this if zombies were surrounding me? There's nothing I could do if I don't have a jetpack. I mean, how do I get out of this? And then I looked over and realized there was a storm drain about 20 yards away in the woods. And I thought, why in the heck is that there? And I went and looked at it and realized they had storm drains all over this area I live in. And they built them up on like these pylons of concrete sticking out of the ground, so they couldn't get buried over, so you could find them to clean them out or access them. And I thought, that's what he's going to do. He's going to run over there, open that thing, and jump into it and pull the lid back on it. And that answer presented itself, and it was really kind of cool how it did.
Yeah.
It kind of changed the rest of the story, because then he had to navigate underground in the dark in the sewer tunnels to the nearest body of water to get out. You had some ideas about that, and I can't remember what they were, talking about dealing with writer's block, walking away from it and letting the problem almost answer itself.
Yeah. Well, one thing that Matt just talked about is your subconscious.
Yes.
Your brain tends to always be working on things in the background. And so if you do step back from something and give it some time, sometimes if I'm stuck on something and I can't figure out what the next plot point should be or how to get out of a situation, if I take a walk or okay, let me just put the dishes in the dishwasher. Basically doing some sort of physical activity can really help, because it will stimulate your brain, but also you're not actively just sitting there thinking how to solve this problem. It's just like when you forget what you were about to say, if you're okay, let me think so hard about it. You usually can't remember. It's after a few minutes when you're oh, well, and you go on, then suddenly it comes back to you. So you have to let your subconscious work on it by itself without you getting in the way. And one thing that can be helpful is tricking your brain by working on something new. Brains get really excited about new things. And Isaac Asimov, who was a writer and he was very prolific, used this method of setting up different typewriters in his room, and whenever he would get stuck on one project, he'd just get up, move to the next typewriter, and start working on something new. And when you do that, your brain is suddenly so excited about all these new ideas and new possibilities, and so that can help you too. And then when you're working on a different story, your brain can be working on whatever issue you're stuck on in the background.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are afraid of self-publishing, and it really doesn't have to be hard or expensive.
Yeah. And I know one thing for self-publishing that's important is having a lot of material available, especially like for certain genres that are really popular in self-publishing, like romance or like cozy mysteries and stuff like that. Those readers, like, they want to like start a series, and if they like the book, they want to be able to read like the next 5 books in that series. So it can be really beneficial if, as a self-published writer, you have multiple books available for your audience.
My biggest regret, 5 years ago, I wrote 3 zombie apocalypse novels. They were all part of a series. Each one was 120, 140,000 words. I could have gotten 10 to 12 novellas or shorter books. People would have enjoyed them more. They would have ended up paying more for them because they would have bought one at a time instead of, one book for $4. They would have bought, 4 or 5 books for $1 a piece.
Well, you mentioned, you said that was something you didn't know. And that's a really good point. Going along with like being patient and educating yourself, because you don't want to, whether you're trying to traditionally publish or self-publish, you don't want to send a manuscript to an agent that isn't ready, or self-publish a book that isn't ready, or like launch your career and then find out later you would have probably been way more successful if you had done ABC. So like, be patient. It's really hard. I know, like, I'm a writer too, so I'm right there with you guys, and I know how hard it can be to wait. But I hear from clients sometimes that'll come to me and say, like, I wish I would have been more patient, because now I'm having to like change things and then re-release my book, or I wish I would have known this. So like, take the time to educate yourself. There's so many resources out there. Now we have, the internet. So like, you can find almost anything you need. Read books about writing, read books about marketing, get in a writer's group, find an editor, go to local classes, read blogs, etc. Like, if you do it, you will not regret it.
Yeah, and then depending on what you're writing about, whether it's romance or thrillers or aliens, whatever it is, you're going to end up also having a whole bunch of stuff to read about whatever your characters do, whether they're scientists or lawyers or homeless people or whatever it is. I've talked to homeless people on the street and kind of got some of the smells and stuff, and experiences like that. You can't just sit in your room and write about. You have to go out and experience them. I've actually gone into sewers. I've been fortunate because I was a game developer, and for a couple of years I worked with the United States Army to develop a game and simulations. And
yeah, that's really cool.
They flew us all around the country to military bases, and I got to shoot all kind of weapons. And if you have a character who's going to shoot a gun, if you haven't shot one, even if you don't like guns, find someone, call the local NRA, go to a rifle range and shoot a handgun and experience the smell of cordite and the kickback of and there's a fear to pulling the trigger the first time. No matter who you are, if you've never shot a gun, there's a fear the first time you shoot a gun about what's going to happen, because it's an explosion. Absolutely. And there's a deadly projectile coming out the end of it. It just, as a writer, you need to experience these things. Like, I wanted some of my characters to be Black people, and I checked, and that's the correct term now.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to just write. I didn't want to ignore Black people and not represent them in my book, but I also didn't want to just write about it and feel like, well, you're a white guy writing about Black people. That's not genuine or whatever. So I sent my stuff to a handful of people who are all Black, but are all different in different parts of the country, different life situations. And they all were really thrilled to get it, and they all gave me their feedback. And I felt good about the fact that I had represented them well. It's awkward and uncomfortable sometimes, but I feel like these kind of conversations, and that's why I'm doing the podcast, is I think they help your writing become better. It removes a lot of the obstacles for me in writing. I'm one of these people, I don't like writing about something, because every time I write a sentence, my mind goes to, like, I can't just say he picked the lock, because automatically I think, well, how long would it take to pick a lock? Can you really pick a deadbolt like that? And can you do it in the dark? Is it illegal? Or, I'd suddenly have a million questions that I want to know about before I just have a guy pick a lock.
Yeah, so true. That's one thing I've heard agents say, is like they're looking for authenticity in the character, which you know, you might not be like a New York waitress who also knows sleight of hand tricks, but if you can talk to people who are from New York, talk to waitresses, talk to magicians, and like make a character who feels really authentic, it comes through in your manuscript in a way
Right.
that like, it wouldn't if you were just making this stuff up without any sort of experience or without talking to anybody who has those experiences. And it's that sort of like authenticity that makes characters feel so real and pulls readers in and connects them to them.
You have to have conflict in writing, and it's hard to have conflict if all your characters think like you and act like you. And it's really hard to write somebody if you're really pro-life or pro-choice or whatever the topic. If you're not able to at least understand where the other side comes from and why they think the way they do, it's really hard to write conflict, because as humans, most of us want to not have a conflict. So our characters tend to work things out sometimes a little too easily. It's really hard to write a character who's really just that big of a jerk.
Yeah.
And I've had some people tell me, you must be a real asshole to write this character. And it's like, no, the character's a really bad person. And then he gets killed in the end. And that's why the good guy has such a big triumph, because he had to fight a really bad guy. I would love to hear your thoughts on character conflict, writing outside of your comfort zone.
Yeah, conflict is so important. When readers come to your story, they're looking for like strong emotion, which is not going to happen unless there's conflict. And have conflict, like you need your characters to have some really strong desire, some strong objective. What do they want? And then whatever opposes that is going to create your conflict. And so you're so right. Like if all your characters think the same way and they would solve problems in the same way, you're just not going to have conflict. Even in, you know, say there are several chapters where there is no bad guy, or sometimes stories might not have like an external bad guy depending on like what the genre is and what the story is. It might not be like fighting and a shootout and bombs, but like there still has to be conflict.
Yeah.
And so sometimes like your characters, it might be a chapter or two where it's your character and he or she is only surrounded by like people that are friends, that are supporting characters. So how would you have conflict in a time like that? Well, if your two characters think differently, then they're still likely to disagree. Say your main character thinks that they should, like a random example is for some reason you're trapped in a house and you don't have enough food to survive and you're slowly starving and there's like 6 people and your character is like a really good person and they believe, you know, in equality, always doing what's right. They're like, well, we're just going to have to make the best of this and portion out the food. If every other character that's there thinks the same way, then no conflict. But like if you have a character who's really great friends with your character and loves your character, but disagrees and thinks like, no, you, in the end, you have to do whatever it takes for you and the people you love to survive, that character might think, well, we should kill off the weaker people so the stronger ones could survive. So then you automatically have conflict between those two characters. And it can be really hard, like you said, to think like, to make people like that, like you're like, oh, well, I really like this character. Why is he such a terrible person? Like, I don't want him to be so mean. But you have to, like, one way to think about it or to get yourself in that mind frame is instead of thinking like this character's a jerk, just think like, what would get in the way of what your character wants? Your character wants everyone to live. So what would get in the way if somebody doesn't want everyone to live? And then from there, you're like, okay, well, then I have to make a character who thinks this way. So base it on like what your character wants and what can get in the way of that, and that will help you find your conflict.
I was just thinking, you know, if you were in that situation, I would make your death quick and painless.
Thank you.
No, but I know what you mean. It's like adversity brings the best and the worst out of people. There would be people who would say, look, I'll just kill myself so you guys can eat me and survive. And then there'd be people who would be hoarding the food. Or we've talked about a lot of good things. I'll probably have you back on sometime in the future, especially when your book gets published, which I know it will. And
thank you.
I'm excited to do this, and I appreciate you being on and helping me out. And I'm going to encourage everyone to listen to this episode, obviously, and to visit your website. And I just wanted to thank you again. Is there anything you would like to say in conclusion, or anything you'd like people to be, the audience to be aware of or know about?
Well, I just want to encourage writers to keep going. Don't give up. Don't stress yourself about it, and don't rush. It can take a really long time, but in almost all things, like if you have a goal and you work toward it and you remove the obstacles in front of you, which you can do if you really want to and educate yourself and plan, like you are going to get to that goal. So just keep trying and don't give up. We want to hear your story.
That's right. So get it right, get it written, don't get it right. I'm sorry, wait. Don't get it right, get it written is a phrase I hear a lot. And thank you, everybody, for your time. And I will catch you next time on The Writing Monkey. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Writing Monkey podcast. Be sure to visit us online to access our comprehensive show notes and bonus content. Until next time, write, you monkey.